Hello. I know we've been on a bit of an amplifier kick of late, and we've gotten away from guitars, but I wanted to bring it back a little bit to our stringed instruments and do something a little bit different today and talk about this interesting little banjo ukulele. This was made by Albert Houdlett Sons. Albert Houdlett Sons was in business from about 1865 to about 1930. They made banjos and banjo ukuleles mainly, I think, in Brooklyn, New York. They had a few models that pop up for sales from time to time. One of them is the New Art, another one is the Lynn Brook, and this one here, which is a New Way. That's N-U-W-A-Y. One interesting thing about Albert Houdlett Sons is that from about 1873 to 1883, for a period of 10 years, they employed an immigrant called Friedrich Gretsch, who went on to form his own company. I think you can probably guess which company that was. Another cool thing about this particular example, and one thing that has helped me to date this a bit more accurately, is that this had an original vellum head on it that was signed, and this is not a stamp. This is an actual signature of, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see this or not. Let's see if we can make this thing autofocus. Not sure if I can autofocus this thing or not. At any rate, you may be able to see it. It's very faint, but you can see J.O.S. B. Rogers Jr. That is Joseph B. Rogers Jr. and again, that is not a stamp. That is his actual signature. That is the son of the Joseph B. Rogers, who started the Rogers Drum Company, or actually they began making drum heads in around the 1840s. Rogers did, and they made drum heads all the way up until the 1930s when they began making drums. They made some of the best drums of probably the 50s through the 70s before they were eventually sold off to a bigger corporation. But very interesting bit of history there, the signature of the son of the guy who started the company. And again, that's not a stamp. Some of these later ones were stamped from about the 1920s or so on, it seems. They were stamped with his signature, and they also had other stamps on them like Union Brand Warranted, and they shortened it also at one point to just J.O.S. Rogers Jr., and they left off the B. So this is an early one, and it's a signature. So I'm dating this banjo to around probably around 1910 or 1900 to 1910, somewhere around there. As you can see, I've had to replace the head. This is a real piece of goat skin, and we're going to go through what all was done with this thing. If that's something that's of interest to you, we're going to go through some photos of what all was done and talk about how it was repaired and what kind of state it was in when I got it. So if that seems of interest to you, stick around and we'll go through that. Okay, let's take a look at the state this thing was in when I got it. As you can see here, it's got a big rip in the vellum head. The fretboard is missing. It's missing its tuners. It's missing the nut. It's also missing the bridge. You know, this thing was probably unevenly tightened and allowed to dry out, and that's why it busted. But at any rate, I needed a new vellum head, so I went to Ukulele World, and I'll put their information in the description here if you want to find one on your own. This is real goat skin, and it was pretty reasonably priced, I think, through them. I got the fretboard from eBay. These you can find on eBay. There's a Chinese seller that makes these. And by the time you were to make something like this yourself, to cut all the fret slots and to put the dot markers in and everything, it would not be worth it to try to do this. And you probably would come out with a product that wasn't as good as this one. They've done a pretty good job, I have to say. I'm well satisfied with it. By the time I actually got it oiled and on the thing as well, it really looks the part, and it worked out very nicely. It was the right scale length and everything too, so that's good. Found the tuners on eBay as well, and I don't think they were that expensive either. These are, you know, cheaper plastic friction tuners, and that'll work okay for this application. These I've actually had some experience with as well. They have a friction washer on the back, which helps it stay in tune. The ukulele strings, these Alice strings, work as well as any of the other ones I've ever used, and I found these on eBay as well very cheaply. I think these were like $1 a pack or something, so I went ahead and bought a bunch of them. You can see here the way this was constructed. See these holes here? That's because they probably had the fretboard already on when they drilled the holes for the fret markers. So that's of interest. Here you can get a little better look of what state the head was in. And again, these lugs were probably, you know, somebody probably cranked down on this lug maybe, or I'd say they probably cranked down on that lug right there and created a line of force right through the vellum head that just ripped it. And it was probably allowed to dry out too much as well. And you can see where it was pulling away here anyway. So yeah, this whole thing was just way beyond its life. Here I'm just kind of measuring things up. There's a bit of overlap here. The neck itself is a bit larger than the fretboard, so I had to come in and shave a little bit, and then I had to shave a little bit down here as well. And then when I came back in, I stained everything to sort of match, to blend it in. Here's everything taken apart. This is a ring sleeve that fits down over the drum rim itself. Or the shell rather. Here is the rim that your lug's attached to, and there's a little channel. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little channel in there. There's also a metal ring inside the head here. In order to get this head off, actually the best thing, the easiest way I could find was to drop it in hot water. And also that's another thing, you have to drop you can't just put this vellum on and stretch it over the head. You have to actually wet this thing. You have to soak it in hot water, and when you get it out, I recommend putting some lotion on it and letting it soak in a bunch of lotion as well. That's going to make it a lot more supple and pliable. Here's a better look at the rings, and I took some steel wool and cleaned all these off before I put everything back together. This is kind of cool. You can see here the little dovetail joint for this piece and the neck, how they're joined together. There's a little dovetail there. It's kind of hard to see. But you can also see the tool marks here and the way this thing was made. You know, to make something like this now, where you could employ someone in a factory and they're sitting there, you know, making these necks by hand with hand tools. You know, you'd probably spend $1,000 just to have somebody make one of these things, let alone, you know, something you can mass produce and stay in business today. Here you can see the Joseph B. Rogers Jr. Signature, and you know, the more I look at this, actually, now that we have it online or have it on the computer, you know, I can see more. I can see a little bit more contrast, and it looks like this may be a stamp after all, and there may be something stamped down here as well. But the fact that it has a B in it tells me that it's probably before 1920, because I think they dropped this B after 1920 or so. And also they had some other stamps that came along with this that would have dated it to later as well. So I think this is this one's probably around the turn of the century to 1910, somewhere around in there. There's another look at it. With the new head, this is the new piece of vellum. What you do is you just put it over the sleeve, and then put your ring down around it, and then the excess you want to come in and cut off with some scissors and leave enough so that you can fold it up and over, and then glue your way around. And what I used here for this application was just regular super glue. By the time you get the head on and everything, it's going to be tight anyway, no matter what glue you use, because as long as it's a tight fitting head like this one was. There's another look. I was lucky in that I had all of these lugs and hardware pieces intact. The because if you have a bunch of these missing from one of these, it becomes less and less worth it. Now, if you already have these sorts of parts, then that's helpful. I was on the verge actually of making this thing, using this just for parts, but with the tools that I already have invested in, there's no sense in doing that. I may as well go ahead and make it into a playable instrument again. And actually, this little banjo uke was very lucky to find me, because in a lot of other people's hands, I'm sure it would just become a wall hanger, outside of some restaurant bathroom or something like that. And that just would have been sad. There's no sense in that if we can make it into a playable instrument. Here's the baby lotion that I used to kind of make the vellum a bit more supple. I just used Gorilla super glue on the edges of the head, and that just is going to hold it long enough to get the rim on, basically. These are big stretchy rubber bands used for luthier purposes. You can get these through Stuart McDonald, and this is the way I would recommend attaching heads. I've done them a few different ways with different clamps, but this seems to be the best way because it keeps it straight laterally and longitudinally. If you don't want to spend money on buying one of these big rubber bands, you can actually go to this is a good tip. You can go to the grocery store, and I think I have a big green one that I think came off of a crate for produce. So you can go to the grocery store and ask somebody in the back if they have any big long rubber bands that came off of their produce crates. So that's something you can do. A good tip. Here you can see that this was channeled for a 0 fret. The original wouldn't have had a 0 fret, but I went ahead and made this a 0 fret instrument. Because for one thing, it's a little bit easier to do that than to try to cut the... it just saved a little bit of time, and also it works pretty well as well. Here's the finished product, and we're going to take a look at... There's the nut piece, which was cut from a square dowel. You can get these at the Walmart craft section, or you can go to a craft store and get square dowels. You can get them probably at hardware stores as well. Here is the logo. So if you ever come across one of these, you'll know what it is now. The N is missing, but it should have had N, U for new, way, A, H, and S, which you know what that stands for now. That's Albert Houdlett and Sons. It says trademark manufacturers in the middle there. The drum rim itself, I think, was made of maple. You can see all the crazing here in the original finish. And if you don't see crazing after 100 years on a finish like that, then that should throw up a bit of a red flag. That's probably been refinished. You can see the crazing on the headstock there as well. You can see it upside down. But yeah, so that's the state I got it in. That's what I did to repair it. Oops, wrong button. No wonder. If you run across these, one of these, or something similar to it, these can be really cool instruments. They've got a really kind of raunchy sound that's good for old ragtime and even some bluesy type stuff. As we'll see here, actually, I'm going to play a kind of a 1950s bebop sort of song on it, so a little bit anachronistic, but let's check out how this thing sounds.
Well, I said, now come on over, baby, a whole lot of shaking going on. I said, now come on over, baby, a whole lot of shaking going on. We ain't faking, whole lot of shaking going on. Come on over.
Okay, well, that concludes our video on this little turn of the century Albert Houdlett and Sons banjo ukulele. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Hope you've learned something like I did in studying this little thing. If you find something like this maybe in the future languishing away in some forgotten corner of an antique store, don't be afraid to pick it up and try your hand at restoring it to a playable condition. You know, I would just encourage you to try to do things as sympathetically as possible. You know, don't try to install a big you know, a big humbucking pickup in it and turn it into a Gibson guitar or anything like that. But you know, keeping it things as original as possible respects the original intent of the manufacturers and preserves these for another generation of players who, you know, probably don't know what it was like back in the days when immigrants would come to this country and try to make their fortunes, and some succeeded and some failed. You know, and in the case of this one, it's actually spun off another storied company in Gretsch that we still know to this day. So a lot of learning can be done, a lot of learning about history and things through these musical instruments. And I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I hope you will subscribe for more similar videos in the future. I also do a lot of other things such as amplifiers. So if you're into vintage amps, vintage guitars, vintage banjos, and things like that, I'm probably going to try to do a few more guitar repairs and banjo repairs and things of that nature. So please be sure to subscribe and share, and hope to see you again in the future.